Good evening, students. In continuation to the unit on conceptualization, observation, and experiment, in this particular class, I'll be more focused on what is the very idea of conceptualization. So, what do we mean by conceptualization? Before understanding what do we mean by conceptualization, there are two important components of conceptualization. First is that every research study involves concept. You have to look at what kind of concept or concepts you have employed in your study. What kind of concepts employed in a study? Okay, that means we are trying to look at what are the concepts through which we are able to explain a certain phenomena or certain object. On the other hand, we have to look at how to measure the concept. Okay, so the measurement and then the concepts become fundamental part of any study. Two things, one is concept and the other one is measurement, become part of any of the study. Okay, for example, I would like to start with a very idea of what do we mean by the term concept is. Okay, before explaining that, I would like to give a kind of a small example. If you could remember that in the beginning of the class, I tried to make you to understand that what is this course is all about, and then I explained my theorization on this course that deals with science meets local needs. Science meets local needs. The science meets local needs, though it consists of a different set of concepts, and I try to link these concepts in a form of a theory. If we would like to go back and see what is this very idea of this theorization is that the science, what do we mean by science here is that the science is about a knowledge. This knowledge is derived from different set of disciplines. Derived from different set of a discipline. That's why this deriving the knowledge from different set of a discipline would lead to collective epistemes. That means the collective knowledge become part of addressing the local needs. Okay, the second one is that the very idea is that meets here is that exactly what do I mean by the term meets is that it's a kind of an intervention. Or taking this knowledge to the place where it is exactly required. On the other hand, what this term local means, I try to define this local in terms of a geographical sense. Which I would like to put it in two categories. It may be either the rural or it can also include the urban. So the local means here, refers to the geographical spatial understanding here. The needs in terms of the requirement. Then we try to make this need into what is necessity. The necessity always defined in terms of class or certain position, and then want is a desire. So here it is, if you look at this, all these aspects involved in understanding the phenomena of how science can meet the societal demands. There is a very logical or reason behind the theorization on the science meets the local needs. Okay, this is something which is related to the very idea of how do you define certain concept. In the definition, we not only limit ourselves to, for instance, only to one variable, one set of a concept. That means not only a science, but also we need another set of concepts. We need, for instance, the interventions. We need the local, as well as we need the needs to bring a kind of an overall meaning to our theorization. That means in definition, when you define a concept, okay, that means you are able to understand what this object is. At the same time, when you are understanding what this object is, you are also trying to understand the same object in a relational sense. That means how this particular object is linked to other aspects of a phenomenon or phenomena. Okay, so you have to always think about a concept in relation to the other concepts, so that the meaning of a theory would evolve. Suppose if you are not able to understand the concept in relations to the other, that means we fail to understand the phenomena. Okay, so just keep this as a kind of an example. Just an example of it. That means the example of a concept as well as the example of how a theorization can happen. Okay. From here, I'll be moving on to the next idea, next example. Also, I would like to give a small example. The next example is, for instance, in today's context, we used to use that term terrorism. Terrorism, what do we mean by the term or the concept terrorism is? Terrorism is an act, first of all. The next idea is that, what is the idea behind the terrorism? What is the idea behind this act? So what implies this act is that it's a non-governmental political violence. It has certain political objectives. Always the concept of the terrorism is used against the concept of the state. That means used against the state, or used against the nation state, or used against any nation. Okay. Today we are trying to talk or discuss the concept of this terrorism. Okay, in terms of, for instance, in the context of the biological war. There are a lot of claims earlier that the recent phenomena, the ongoing phenomena of COVID-19 may be a kind of an indication to the biological war. It's kind of just an indication. For instance, there are a lot of claims happening in and around this COVID-19. Is that for good example is that the accusations, various accusations are making rounds here, is that it's the Chinese virus. It's more a kind of a racial attacks. The second claim is that the Chinese or the, for instance, the South, which claims that it is the virus is implanted by USA. Implanted by USA through military games, which happened in the last 2019. Okay, 2019. But what the scientific community is trying to say on this? The scientific community's take on the COVID-19 or the emergence of the virus. There are certain scientific community claims that no, it is not something which is related to the biological warfare and all. There is no, for instance, the origin of the virus which happened either in the Chinese or even in the USA. Suppose if there is a kind of a biological warfare, and you will be able to like get the idea of whether how the origin of the virus happened through gene sequencing. Or by understanding the genetical order of the virus. Suppose there is certain sort of a modification that has been intervened in the evolution of the virus, the scientists can easily identify this. But so far, right now, the scientist claims that so far they couldn't identify any sort of a kind of an interventions, external interventions in the evolution of the virus, through which they are just negating the very idea of the biological war. That means they are able to negate the very idea of there is no such terrorism act, there is no act of terrorism. But what is eventually which is happening here is that because of, for instance, any sort of a kind of the pandemic situations in terms of SARS or MERS. Okay, what is happening here is that the eventual is that it's the biopolitics. That eventually each one is trying to understand what is the notion of the biopolitics. Okay, the biopolitics is about how an individual is attempting to save one's life. In the midst of crisis or disaster situation. This is purely the very idea behind the biopolitics that could be linked to the very idea of emergence of the various diseases, the spread of the diseases. This is something what we are trying to define, we are trying to understand as a concept. But you should remember that all this theorizations, all this understanding which comes from within the sociology or the social sciences in general, that may vary from science, that may vary from even from discipline to discipline. For instance, it may vary from the physical science to a chemical science, or even, for instance, it moves from the biological science. Okay, you should always keep that what kind of a concepts you are able to understand, what kind of concepts you are able to understand, how the concept is theorized, and how it's going, how the concept is measured in reality. Okay, so you should keep this in mind. I'm exactly giving this example from within the discipline of sociology in particular. Okay, so the next idea is that after giving a kind of an overall idea of what is this, the very idea of the concept. Okay, I started, for instance, I have started with the idea of the terrorism, but you eventually you see that how the argument proceed. When the argument proceed, and I'm slowly moving into the very idea of the biopolitics. That means how, as an individual, we are attempting to save our life in the midst of the crisis. For instance, even for instance, the panic buying. Okay, the panic buying is that okay, what is going to happen in the next 21 days or the next 30 days? So what every family is trying to do is that purchase as much as possible, because they want to, each family want to save their life, their children. Okay, this is what purely like what kind of strategies which the individual are able to attempt to employ to save the family and his own life. So this is purely the idea of the biopolitics, which could be a very good example of a concept to understand the reality. Always remember that the concept should able to lend light or shed light on the reality. This reality is something which is ongoing in nature. So the very idea behind the concept, I said it. The first one is that the concept, we will be able to make sense of a concept in relation to other concepts. Number one. Number second is that if we are trying to understand the concept in understanding the reality. So that means the concept should lend light on the reality. Suppose if the concept is not able to put light on the reality, that means there is no use of the concept. Okay, this is what the exact explanation of this. Okay, the second idea, that what do we mean by the term concept? How do we slowly move to the idea of conceptualization, and then from there, for instance, deriving the variables and then taking the indicators out, and finally, how do we measure those indicators? So these all are what we are going to see in this particular class. First is, what do we mean by concept? The concept, as I've already in the previous class, I have already explained or already made you to understand what do we mean by the term concept. The concept is a mental construct. This mental construct of an object or a phenomenon. Okay. So here I said the object here, maybe even for instance in science, even it may be a kind of an time, speed you are able to tell, or even for instance electricity. These all are something which we try to say the concept, an example of a concept. The next is that, what is conceptualization? What do we mean by the term conceptualization? The term conceptualization refers to the process of arriving at a definition, definition by attempting to understand the type, characteristics, or properties of an object. Okay, the conceptualization, which means we are trying to arrive at the definition. This definition should lend light on the object in terms of a structural sense. At the same time, it also should explain the parts. For instance, very good part is that we say a table. So what consists of a table? A table, which means there will be a kind of an there will be a kind of an 4 legs will be there, or 3 legs will be there. On the top of it, there will be a kind of an wood, plywood, which is being placed. Okay, so the table, what is the use of the table? So you will be able to explain each and every aspect of the very idea of the table. Similarly, it moves from the idea of the table to the chalk piece to the board to the, for instance, computer, fan, or everything, each and every aspect that should clearly explain the type, characteristics, or the properties of an object. Okay, so this is what kind of an the process of conceptualization we mean. So the next idea is that how do we understand this conceptualization? How do we understand the concept? Okay, once you define the concept, or once you define the object, the next part is that how we are going to understand this. It should really reflect in reality. The definition, whatever the definition you are able to define, it should exactly, you should able to see it in reality. Okay, so that for instance, how do you link this definition to the reality? When you will be able to link the reality to the definition by the concept of a variable. Each variable would help you to understand the object as well as understand the concept. Okay, the next is that how do you measure this variable? Is that it's an indicator. Through indicators, we measure the variables. Through indicators, we measure the variables. By measuring the variables, we understand the object. By doing this, what is happening here is that we are able to understand the reality. This is what the very idea behind doing a theorization. This theorization should lend light on the reality itself. Okay, so I'm going to put this into a kind of a small tabular column, small table kind of a thing. Concept is a mental image of an object, variable, helps to understand the object. Okay, the next one is that indicators. It helps to measure the variable. Okay, so now I'm going to use a kind of a small example of the concept, the variable, and the indicator. by taking one of your project. I want to know the availability of pure drinking water in a locality, in a village. Understanding the availability of pure drinking water. So I use the word the pure drinking water in a village. I would like to use a different set of concepts to understand this availability of drinking water in a village. Okay, the first concept is that number one, very simple. I would like to keep it very simple. The first one is drinking water. Okay, the very idea of the drinking water. First of all, I would like to know that the frequency of drinking water which comes through the municipal corporations. How often the drinking water comes in a week, and for how long? Okay, this was the question. Okay, so always remember this. This is an indicator. And this is a variable. The frequency is a variable. Drinking water is a concept. Okay, the second question, I'll be moving on to the next level, is that do you have an RO? Okay, the next one is that the purity of the drinking water. Okay, so do you use that, for instance, any technologies to purify the water? So the next question I'll be asking that on terms of the pure drinking water. Pure drinking water. So the next, the idea of the drinking water is that to know whether do they have the technology or not. So I'll be asking the question is here is that the accessibility. Accessibility to the technology or not. So do you have, the next question is that do you have any RO system in the house? Okay, in the house. So here what is the variable I'm using? The accessibility to the pure drinking water. Okay, the next one is that I also want to link that availability to the very idea of the class positions. Okay, so the next one is that I would like to use the term poverty. So when you understand the term of the poverty, I am trying to understand it in terms of two things. One is in terms of subjective positions. The next in terms of an understanding and absolute positions. The subjective positions, do you think, for instance, I would like to ask a question that do you think you belong to the poor category? Do you belong to the poor category? The absolute sense is that I would like to infer in terms of an family income. What is your family incomes? Okay, so the next idea is that through which I will be entering into that socio-economic status. What is the socio-economic status of an individual? So I want to slowly derive this idea of poverty, income, into this socio-economic category also. That means income level. First is income level. The second one is what is their education qualification is, and what is their occupation is. By trying to understand this, then convert these variables into a question format, indicator format. So for instance, what is your income, that individual income? So for instance, the individual income may be a kind of an, I used to have a kind of a range. Maybe like their income might be 10,000, more than 10,000 or lesser than 10,000 rupees. The education qualifications, maybe they will be like, I'll be able to categorize whether they pass 10 or +2 or a kind of a degree or diploma. Okay, and then I'll be coming to that occupational status. For instance, what is their occupational status? Whether they are employed in a government job or a private business. By what I am trying to do here is that to know the accessibility, or to know the different the means of getting the pure drinking water, I have to understand all these aspects, so that I'll be able to infer, okay, whether a particular family has an accessibility or not. Then suppose if the family doesn't have any access to the pure drinking water, okay, they are only like relying on the supply of the municipal corporations, they don't have any other sources. That means they have to spend too much of money in buying the water. Okay, so there you will be able to think about the idea that okay, the community water system, the community RO system could be placed. Okay, so this is how actually, like, you will be like, from understanding this socio-economic data, you will be able to get into the idea, you will be able to get into the aspect of new technological ideas would come by simply asking the questions which are related to here. Okay, so I explained what is frequency. That means you have to identify, sorry, it's not the frequency, you have to identify the variables, you have to identify the indicators. These indicators should lend light on the variables, you will be able to measure it, and then the variables should explain the concepts clearly. Always remember that you are understanding the concepts in two sense. One is understanding the concepts in relational sense. One concept, how one concept is linked to the other concept. At the same time, the concept should lend light on the reality. Suppose if the concept is not able to, we are not able to use the concept in relational sense, or it doesn't expose the reality, that means we have failed to take an appropriate concept for the study. Okay, and I would like to give a kind of another example, one particular example, to make you to understand what is constant. What is the term constant? The term constant is that, for instance, here the villages. Suppose I'm trying to understand this very idea to the villages. The villages are here constant. Villages are constant in nature, but the villages, the socio-economic profile varies. Okay, so for example, the socio-economic profile here, it comes from here. I am trying to understand, by understanding the socio-economic profile, I am trying to understand the accessibility as well as inaccessibility to the pure drinking water. Okay, so another good example of to understand the term concept, good example of a term concept is that the students' engagement in creative work. This is another example. I want to understand, for instance, as a researcher, I want to understand that how the students are engaged in the creative work. Here, I want to know the phenomena of what is creative work, and then I want to know that how they are actually engaged. This engagement is a variable. How they are engaged, how much time they allocate to the creative work, what kind of a concepts do they bring, what kind of a new models they are able to develop. So these are all a part of the creative work. But what didn't vary here is that the students as a concept didn't vary at all. Constant doesn't vary, as it stays as it is. It's a kind of a stable. Okay. But as a variable, it varies in nature. It varies in terms of a type, characteristics through which you will be able to measure the object of the study or the concept of the study. Okay. This is largely a kind of a good example. But the question is that how we are going to measure this, what kind of a scale we would like to use for the study. The next idea is that the idea of there are 4 levels of measurement. So here measuring comes. Four levels of measurement. I'll be making very simple column here. Okay, there are 4 levels of measurements. One is nominal scale. The second one is an ordinal scale. The third one is an interval. The fourth one is a ratio scale. I'll be making a kind of a very simple column. The first scale is a nominal scale. The second scale is ordinal scale. The third is interval. The fourth is ratio. Ratio scale. This column is focus. This is kind of a very simplified table which I have made it. Focus, example. The third one is on appropriate mathematical function. The first idea of the nominal scale is that different scales. Okay. The first idea of the nominal scale is that it focuses on quality. It focuses on the quality. So the quality in terms of, for example, in terms of what is your nationalities? Whether you are an Indian, whether you are an American, whether you are belong to what European countries, German or a kind of an French, which country, what is the nationality? Okay, what is your nationalities? Or you will be able to ask, what is your religious affiliation? Okay, or you will be able to ask about, for instance, in Indian context, you will be asking that the caste. The caste is a social position here. Okay, so you will be able to ask what is your caste is. Okay, so the question is that what is the appropriate mathematical function is that x equal to y or x not equal to y, or a is equal to b, or a is not equal to b, that means in which category it comes. You are trying to understand whether, for instance, if I say that in religious affiliations, I am trying to explain that there are 4 categories are there: Hindus, Muslims, Christians, others. Okay, in which category the people are coming? So, for instance, I go to one individual, majority of them, for instance, 120 people are here, and then the next is 15, and then another 15 is here, and the other one is 10. So, which category is the highest in nature? Okay, so this is the following of an example. And the next one is that ordinal scale. Ordinal scale explains the order. Okay, exactly, it explains the order. Example is that you go to a coffee shop. Okay, so in the coffee shop you are able to ask, for instance, small or medium, okay, or large. You want small cup of coffee or medium cup of coffee or large cup of coffee. So in here is that you will be able to see that in terms of an appropriate mathematical formulation is greater than or lower than in nature. Okay, so it is kind of an in terms of an low or high. Low or high. Example is that suppose if you want to understand the conflict. Okay, in understanding the conflict is that whether the level of conflict is greater in certain situations, or the level of a conflict is very lower in certain situations. How do you look at it? For instance, in the case of an emergency. Okay, in the case of an emergency, people who want of an essential commodities, in terms of an essential need of an essential commodities, people get into a kind of a conflict because they want to grab as much as possible. If there is a kind of, and the supply is very less but the demand is very high, then the conflict will come into the situation. So you are trying to understand that the priorities in terms of an high or low. So but the interval scales, okay, the interval scales are placed, the values are placed within a range. You are able to place certain values within a range. For instance, this is purely a kind of, the interval scale is purely an part of, for instance, science. In terms of a temperature, this is a very good example. Okay, you gave a kind of the range between the 30 degrees Celsius to 60 degrees Celsius. You will be able to place somewhere, you will be able to say that the temperature is 37.6 or 36.5. So what you are doing here is that in mathematical calculations, plus or minus calculation comes. Okay, so we are even, for instance, this ordinal scale can be converted into an interval scale. Okay, so when the ordinal scale can be converted into an interval scale is that how often, for instance, how many times the people are getting into the conflict. Okay, the conflict is increasing in nature. For instance, it's the conflict is between the two individuals or conflict between the two groups. So how often it is there they are fighting, the frequencies since once or twice or thrice, or it may be, for instance, initially the conflict will be very high and slowly you will be able to say that the decline of the concept, increase and the decrease of the conflicts. And the third one is that the ratio scale. The ratio scale you will be able to see in terms of a number format. Very good example is that age. Okay, so the age starts with, for instance, 0 to 120. But here in the ratio scale, you will be able to introduce multiplications as well as the divisions. Here, for instance, I would like to know that the ratios, the number of individuals in a given population. For instance, how many people are 50 years old, and as well as how many people are, for instance, in the category of 20. So I'll be able to say that here there are 10 people are here. Here there are maybe a kind of the 20 people. So what I am trying to do here is that it's in ratios I will be able to convert from the 10 people into a 20 people. Okay, so this ratio scales helps in understanding, for instance, in terms of a number of death which happens in a given populations. Okay, how many death is happening in the category of 50 as well as in the category of 20, how many people are like employed in certain sectors. Okay, so this all can be like looked within the variable of looked within the scale of a ratio. Always remember this 3 has certain mathematical inferences. This is used for quantitative measurements. This is purely qualitative, because the nationality refers to a kind of a value, religious affiliations, for instance Hindu, Muslim, or a kind of an Christianity, it refers to a kind of an values. But at the same time, if you come to an ordinal scales, whether the coffee is how many number of a coffee, for instance whether you need a small coffee or a kind of a medium, it has, for instance, the number of people would like to go for a small, or the number of people would like to go for a medium cup of a coffee or the large cup of a coffee. Okay, so this all can have a kind of the mathematical inferences compared to the quality understanding in terms of an value understanding, in terms of a nationality, in terms of a religious affiliations, in terms of a caste. Okay, so when you formulate the questionnaires, how we are able to set the questionnaires, we will be able to set the questionnaires, or we will be able to enter into the idea of survey research. Survey research as well as setting the questions with these logics. Okay, with these logics. Without understanding the measurements, you will not able to understand you will not able to get into the idea of a survey research, as well as you will not able to get into the idea of how to formulate certain questions. Okay, and remember this, we are just going back from the questions, that means that kind of a set of indicators, and then you move to variables, and then you move to concepts. Always this concepts is linked to research questions. So